The biggest wealth killers in your 20s and 30s aren't always about the obvious things like how much you spend on coffee or avocado toast. They are actually the major life decisions that quietly drain your bank account over time without you even realizing it. If you want to build serious wealth, you have to look beyond the basic budgeting advice. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden wealth killers that most personal finance channels simply do not talk about. And the very first one on the list is one that is incredibly easy to overlook: staying in the wrong city. Geography might just be one of the single most important financial choices you will ever make in your entire life. If you grew up in a place where the local economy just doesn't support the industry you want to work in, where the average paycheck is drastically lower than what you could command elsewhere, your loyalty to your hometown is literally costing you money every single day. A city that actually accelerates your wealth building journey typically has two defining characteristics. First, it offers exceptional upward mobility in your specific career field. And second, it naturally surrounds you with highly ambitious people who share your financial drive. Starting your career in a high opportunity city gives you an incredible advantage because your initial salary becomes the baseline for every single negotiation you will have for the rest of your life. Let's look at an example. Imagine you live in a Midwestern area like Kansas City. The median household income there hovers right around $70,000 a year. Now, if you take that exact same skill set and move to a booming tech hub like Austin, that median jumps to around $100,000. And if you go to San Francisco, you are looking at upwards of $140,000. Even when you factor in a slightly higher cost of living, you are essentially leveraging the geographic wage gap to your advantage. This concept is basically geographic arbitrage in action. Let me give you a fascinating real-world example to illustrate just how powerful this can be. A while back, there was a story about a gold refinery located in Switzerland, right on the edge of the Italian border. The most interesting part of this operation wasn't the gold itself, but the workforce. A massive portion of the factory workers were actually Italian citizens who lived just across the borderline. They chose to work in Switzerland because the Swiss wages were exponentially higher than anything they could earn back home. Every single day, these workers would cross the border to collect a premium Swiss paycheck, and then they would immediately take that money back to Italy, where the cost of living was a fraction of the price. While that is a very extreme, literal cross-border example, the underlying financial principle is exactly the same for anyone choosing where to plant their roots. Beyond just the raw numbers on your paycheck, the other massively underrated factor of where you choose to live is the sheer quality of your network. Your net worth is deeply tied to your network. The kinds of exclusive opportunities you stumble into, the mentors you meet, and the business partnerships you form are all heavily dictated by your zip code. You can always decide to move back to a quieter hometown later in life once your wealth is established. But defaulting to a low opportunity area during your prime earning years is a silent wealth killer. Now, moving on to the second wealth killer, and this one catches a lot of responsible people off guard: dangerously overfunding your emergency reserves. If you are watching this, you probably care about being financially responsible. The standard advice says you need 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up for a rainy day, just in case you suddenly lose your job. Having that safety net ensures you can pay your rent and buy groceries while looking for a new job. But the problem starts when that basic safety net turns into a massive cash hoard. It is surprisingly common to see people keeping $90,000, $110,000, or even $180,000 sitting idle in a basic high-yield savings account. They do this because it provides a psychological safety blanket against catastrophic failure. However, hoarding 16 to 24 months of expenses in cash is actively destroying your potential wealth due to opportunity cost. Let's run the math. If your monthly expenses are $5,000, a proper 6-month emergency fund is $30,000. But if you hold 16 months worth, that equals $80,000. That leaves an excess of $50,000 just sitting there. If you leave that $50,000 in a savings account at around 3.5% interest, instead of investing it in the market at an average 8.5% return, that overly cautious mindset could cost you over $156,000 in lost growth over the next 20 years. Let's move on to the third wealth killer, and honestly, this is probably the most uncomfortable topic on the entire list: divorce. While people rarely want to view marriage through a financial lens, The reality is that choosing your life partner is arguably the single most consequential financial decision you will ever make. When a marriage falls apart, it does not just break hearts, it fundamentally shatters balance sheets. The statistics paint a pretty harsh picture. In the United States, the divorce rate sits right around 40 to 50% for first-time marriages, making it the sixth highest globally. And shockingly, the odds get progressively worse if you try again. Second marriages have a failure rate of around 60%, and third marriages jump all the way up to 73%. Despite these incredibly high probabilities, only about 15% of couples actually sign a prenuptial agreement before tying the knot. People naturally assume everything will work out, but ignoring the financial mechanics of a legal partnership leaves your hard-earned assets completely exposed if things eventually go south. So, why exactly does a split devastate your finances so badly? The most common drivers of divorce range from a lack of commitment at 75% to infidelity, and heavily feature financial problems right around the 40% mark. When the split happens, the immediate legal fees alone can easily vaporize $25,000 right out of the gate, but the true wealth destruction hides in the secondary costs. Imagine you and your partner own a home together. If you separate, you typically have to either refinance that mortgage at today's brutally high interest rates, or you are forced to sell the property prematurely, potentially taking a massive loss in a cooling market. On top of that, you have to divide retirement accounts, which often requires specific court orders and can trigger nasty early withdrawal penalties or heavy tax burdens. Add in the cost of physically moving, buying duplicate furniture, and untangling joint business ventures, and a typical divorce can effortlessly drain anywhere from $60,000 to over $120,000 from your net worth, permanently setting back your financial timeline. The fourth massive wealth killer you have to watch out for is the desperate trap of trying to look rich. You have probably heard the old phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, and the reason it has survived for decades is because it perfectly describes one of the most destructive financial behaviors in modern society. We are constantly wired to measure our own success against what our friends, neighbors, or random influencers on Instagram appear to possess. But what you are looking at is nothing more than a carefully curated highlight reel. You have absolutely no idea what is happening on their actual balance sheet. That luxury SUV in their driveway is likely heavily leased, those designer clothes could be bought on credit, and that gorgeous downtown apartment might be devouring 65% of their monthly take-home pay. This creates what people often call the $40,000 millionaire, someone who makes a very average income but spends every single penny trying to project an illusion of extreme wealth, leaving them entirely broke behind the scenes. The ultimate irony is that the people who aggressively flaunt designer labels are usually the ones drowning in payments, while the actual millionaires next door are driving 10-year-old sedans and quietly compounding their portfolios. By the way, if you are finding these insights helpful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I am also super curious to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know, which of these wealth killers have you seen ruin someone's finances the fastest? Now, let's transition into the fifth wealth killer, which is aggressively optimizing for a high base salary while completely ignoring equity. This trap is especially common if you work in the tech sector, for a rising startup, or at a mid-sized public company. When you negotiate a new job offer, you usually get to choose a balance. You can demand a massive cash salary with very few stock options, or you can take a slightly lower monthly paycheck in exchange for a much larger slice of company equity. Far too many young professionals automatically grab the highest possible cash salary because they want instant gratification to inflate their current lifestyle or upgrade their apartment. But here's the critical secret. A single successful equity outcome can completely dwarf a decade of standard salary bumps. Let's look at the math using a hypothetical scenario. If a company offers you 20,000 shares, that number means absolutely nothing until you understand the total outstanding shares. Let's say you do the math with HR and realize those shares equal exactly 0.2% of the entire company. If you diligently hold that equity, and the company eventually goes public or gets acquired for $200 million, your tiny fraction of ownership suddenly translates to a $400,000 windfall. Of course, you must do strict due diligence to ensure the company actually has a viable future, rather than blindly trusting a risky garage startup. But if the business model is solid, choosing ownership over a slightly bigger paycheck is how real generational wealth is built. The next massive wealth killer is one that disguises itself as playing it safe, and that is staying on the sidelines when it comes to investing. It is incredibly common to see people hoarding their money in cash simply because they are waiting for the market to cool off, or they want to perfectly time a massive dip. But here is the harsh reality. Waiting around for the absolute perfect moment to invest is the most guaranteed way to ensure your money never actually grows. Every single day that your cash sits idle in a checking account, it is slowly being eroded by the invisible tax of inflation. Your purchasing power is literally shrinking while you wait. While I completely understand the deep psychological need to feel secure, sitting out of the market entirely is actually the riskiest move you can make. If you are terrified of volatility, you have to realize that the steady decay of your money's value is far more dangerous over a 30-year timeline than a temporary market pullback. At the absolute bare minimum, that cash needs to be working for you in a high-yield savings account. But true wealth requires stepping into the arena. To truly understand the cost of sitting on the sidelines, we have to look at the historical data of market performance. Let's imagine you invested a theoretical $20,000 into an S&P 500 index fund a few decades ago and just left it alone. If you stayed fully invested through every single high and low, that balance would have aggressively compounded into roughly $384,000. But here is where the math gets genuinely terrifying. If you tried to time the market and accidentally missed just the 10 best performing days during that entire multi-decade stretch, your overall gains would be slashed by 56%. It gets exponentially worse from there. Missing the 20 best days destroys 74% of your potential profit, and if you miss the 30 best days, you are looking at an 84% collapse in total gains. Your entire portfolio's lifetime growth is heavily dictated by just a handful of explosive days. Unless you are on the verge of retirement and desperately need to preserve short-term capital, trying to jump in and out of the market is a fool's errand. Time in the market will always be timing the market. That brings us to our next major wealth killer, which is something called sunk cost loyalty in the workplace. This happens when you stay at a job way longer than you actually should, simply because it feels incredibly comfortable. You know the exact routine, you like your coworkers, the commute is familiar, and the thought of updating your resume feels completely exhausting. But corporate loyalty is often a severe double-edged sword that quietly sabotages your earning potential. When you stay firmly planted at one company for years on end, human resources is typically only going to authorize standard cost of living adjustments, which usually hover around a tiny 3 to 4% raise each year. Especially if you started out with a relatively low base salary right out of school, compounding that tiny percentage means you are barely keeping your head above water. We are often conditioned to feel lucky just to have a stable paycheck, making us deeply afraid to rock the boat or demand what our skills are actually worth in the open market. But companies are absolutely not in the business of handing out proactive, massive pay raises just to be generous. Let's put some specific numbers to this to show just how damaging corporate loyalty can be over the long run. Imagine you land a job at a massive international logistics firm and your starting salary is a respectable $75,000 a year. You keep your head down, do great work, and every couple of years, management rewards you with that standard 3% bump. Fast forward an entire decade of dedicated service to this one firm. After 10 years of grinding away, your salary has slowly crept up to roughly $87,000. On paper, it looks like a bigger number, but when you factor in a decade's worth of compounding inflation and the rising cost of housing, your actual purchasing power has significantly decreased. You have essentially volunteered to cap your own value because you never forced a renegotiation. If you do not actively advocate for your own financial progression, your employer will happily pay you exactly what they have to, and not a single penny more. The harsh truth is that internal promotions and annual reviews are almost never going to match the raw financial jump of securing a completely new offer somewhere else. The most effective strategy to break out of this stagnant wealth trap is to strategically switch employers every few years, especially during the crucial early stages of your career. When you pivot to a new company, you completely bypass the internal promotion red tape and entirely reset your baseline salary during the negotiation phase. Studies consistently back this up. Research from major financial institutions shows that workers who actively hop jobs see their average earnings spike by over 11%, And in many high-demand fields, those jumps routinely exceed 30% in a single move. The core idea is to change lanes every 1 to 3 years. You can make a lateral move for a much higher salary, or you can take on a higher title for a modest pay bump that sets up your next big leap. As long as you are consistently stepping up the ladder in either title or compensation, by the time you reach your late 30s, your base income will have multiplied far beyond what any loyalist could ever achieve. You have to treat yourself like a free agent in the marketplace, constantly maximizing your market value rather than waiting for permission to earn more. Now, let's talk about a wealth killer that is incredibly common but still needs to be heavily addressed, and that is debt. But we need to be very specific here, because not all debt is inherently evil. There is a massive difference between strategic leverage and toxic high-interest consumer debt. Taking out a reasonable mortgage to buy a home or utilizing a student loan for a high-paying degree are generally calculated uses of leverage. In those specific scenarios, you are borrowing money at a relatively low rate to acquire an asset or a skill set that will predictably appreciate or generate substantial income for you down the line. That type of borrowing can actually be a highly effective tool for wealth creation if it is managed responsibly. The real danger and the absolute destruction of your financial future comes from carrying high-interest debt that is tied directly to depreciating assets or fleeting lifestyle expenses. When you use borrowed money to fund vacations, luxury clothes, or endless dinners out, you are essentially stealing from your future self to pay for a temporary thrill today. The ultimate culprit in this toxic category is credit card debt, and it is a psychological trap that millions of people fall into during their 20s and 30s. The average annual percentage rate for credit cards right now hovers around 22%. To put that completely into perspective, if you are carrying a rolling balance of $15,000 on your cards, you are paying roughly $275 every single month strictly in interest charges. That is money simply vanishing into thin air before you even begin to touch the actual principal amount you owe. When a huge chunk of your monthly cash flow is immediately swallowed up by predatory interest payments, building long-term wealth becomes mathematically impossible. Every single dollar you send to the credit card company is a dollar that cannot be invested in your own future. If there is one absolute rule you should follow to protect your finances, it is to never ever carry a high interest balance from month to month. You either pay it off completely, or you do not swipe the card in the first place. This leads us right into another infamous wealth killer, one that modern society practically pressures you into making: buying way too much car. We constantly tie so much of our personal identity and our perceived status to the brand of vehicles sitting in our driveway. But in reality, a car is an incredibly aggressive, silent wealth killer. Let's say you go out today and buy a brand new vehicle for $45,000. That translates to a hefty monthly payment of around $800. But that is just the raw sticker price. Once you factor in full coverage insurance premiums, routine maintenance, rising gas prices, and the brutal reality of rapid depreciation, your true cost of ownership easily skyrockets past $1,100 a month. That new car smell fades in just a few short weeks, but that crushing financial obligation sticks with you for 5 to 7 years. You are chaining a massive portion of your income to a heavy piece of metal that is actively losing its value every single time you turn the key in the ignition. Instead of sacrificing your future for a shiny hood ornament, consider the financial alternative of driving a highly reliable, slightly used vehicle. If you purchase a car that is about 4 years old, with roughly 40,000 miles on it, you gracefully let someone else take that massive initial depreciation hit. A reliable used car might bring your monthly payment down to a very manageable $450. That instantly frees up $350 every single month in your personal budget. Your daily commute remains exactly the same, your life does not change, but your financial trajectory alters completely. If you take that extra $350 and passively invest it at an average 8% return, over a 10-year period, that money grows to roughly $60,000. That is 60 grand directly in your pocket just for choosing a car that is slightly older. You get to keep your daily mobility without sacrificing a massive chunk of your potential net worth to a depreciating liability. Building real, lasting wealth is just as much about the hidden pitfalls you aggressively avoid as it is about the actual money you make. Staying vigilant against these everyday traps will ensure your hard-earned cash actually stays yours to compound over time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I am really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Out of all the wealth killers we discussed today, from keeping up with your neighbors to buying an overpriced car, which one do you think is the hardest for most people to avoid? Let me know your answer down in the comments below. It is incredibly easy to fall into these financial traps when everyone around you is doing the exact same thing. But recognizing them early is the first massive step toward true financial freedom. See you in the next video, and remember, stay smart with your money. Take care.